Alex O'Connor has Richard Dawkins on his podcast, and some viral clips emerge, specifically about Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig. And it forces us to ask the question based upon what he says about these men. Is Richard Dawkins so intellectually superior to them? Are they simply standing in his shadow and they are inferior and they do not deserve his time because they are utterly intellectually contemptible? Or are we experiencing right before us the last days of a form of militant atheism that should have gone by the wayside a long time ago? And is this Richard Dawkins' swan song signaling to us all that atheism is in fact dead? We'll talk about that and more today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, we are knee-deep in one of the most important documentaries, I believe, of our time on the fatherlessness epidemic in America. If you want to see the full trailer for the film that we have at this point in time with Dennis Prager, Douglas Wilson, and Warren Farrell and others, then I highly recommend that you sign up for our newsletter. You can do that by going to the link on the screen. Not only will you gain access to great Indie Thinker content extras, but you'll also see the full trailer that we have at this point in time in our early stages of production, and it's fantastic. I'm telling you, what we have to expose in this fatherless documentary will help change the future of America, but we need your help to do that, because also by subscribing to the newsletter, you'll access ways to help support the film so that we can finish this thing and bring it to production so each and every one of you can enjoy it. So again, go to the link on the screen or go to the description of this podcast where you can find a way to subscribe to our newsletter where you'll gain access to the full trailer of Fatherless. When the new atheist emerged on the scene, there's no doubt about it, they had a prominent place in society. Now, for my part, I'll just say that they seem to make up for their lack of taking Christianity and religion seriously with witticism and contempt.
The lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
And their legacy still lives on today, especially in the comments section, where streamers who live in their mother's basement still hang on to some of these old arguments, like anybody who believes in God might as well believe in the tooth fairy, as though these two things were on similar platforms. As though Christianity wasn't responsible for thousands of years of theology and philosophy and science, as though Christianity weren't responsible for the American experiment. You know, it's inarguable that Christianity was a major fundamental force in shaping America. Whether or not America is a Christian nation, we can argue on a different day, but it is undeniable that Christianity made a major influence on the West and shaped the West as we know it today. Now, in the aftermath of these new atheists who have now disappeared mostly from the scene, we have the emergence of people like Douglas Murray, who are bold enough to say,
we are Christians anyway, whether we like it or not, and we're probably finding that out at the moment. I mean, where the hell do people think that human rights came from?
Yeah, right.
I mean, these are things that exist on the embers of Christian thought.
You know, if you hate Christianity, where in the hell do you think civil rights came from if it didn't come from Christian scripture? And other people like Jordan Peterson, who are captivating audiences with narratives from the Old Testament and other places. So suffice to say, we are now living in the aftermath of the new atheist movement, and we are finding that there is a hunger for religion that we had all but believed perhaps was gone. So is Richard Dawkins right? Is theism dead? Is God dead? Is Christianity just this fairy tale that doesn't deserve your time? Or should we take these thousands of years of Christian philosophy and thought a little more seriously? Let's hear what Richard Dawkins has to say, at least about Jordan Peterson, on this clip.
We were talking about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and it's an interesting detour, but I did want to ask you about this vision of religion for two reasons. This idea that religion, we don't really care about the question of whether it's true that Jesus was born of a virgin or whether he actually died on the cross. In fact, maybe I'm just going to refuse to answer it altogether and say that this is a cultural thing. It's a way of life. It's a motivating reason behind your behaviors. I think that this has got a lot to do with its popularization through people like Jordan Peterson. Ayaan Hirsi Ali seems to have been spending some time with Jordan Peterson and getting on with him, at least in this regard. And I want to ask you about it for two reasons. Firstly, I want to know, I mean, you had a conversation with Jordan Peterson. It was for about an hour and a half where you talked about you talked about some culture stuff, but he's very well known at the moment. He's writing a book at the moment for talking about religion, and he comes at it from this completely different perspective to, I imagine, the perspective that most of your previous Christian opponents, not that Jordan Peterson is strictly a Christian, have come at it from. And I wonder what you make of him and his approach.
I enormously respect his courage in standing up to the Canadian laws about free speech. So I want to just get that out of the way first. I hugely respect that and value him for that reason. When he talks about religion, I think it's bullshit. I think that he doesn't make any sense at all. I think he's impressing people by using language they don't understand, rather like Deepak Chopra, where people think, oh, it must be terribly profound because I can't understand it, which is not something I can respect. Michael Shermer told me that he tried to pin him down and said, do you actually believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? And Jordan Peterson said, it would take me at least 2 days to answer that. So Michael said more or less, well, how about one sentence or one word? No. And that's how I feel about that. All the stuff about Jungian archetypes, and not that I would be skeptical about that, but constantly dragging them in. I mean, I think the most egregious example of that is where he looks at works of primitive art, works of tribal art, where he shows things like two snakes coiling around each other and says, well, they must have had some primitive, primeval knowledge of DNA. Perhaps they looked into their own cells in some sense and saw the DNA. Perhaps the DNA is the double helix is a Jungian archetype. I mean, that is sheer bullshit, and I told him so.
Do you think that you can have a productive conversation with him about religion if this is the approach he's taking? Do you think there's any room for progress here, talking to someone like Peterson?
Well, I hesitate to say no about that to anybody, but I have so far I'm not given any confidence, and I want to once again say how much I respect his courage in standing up to the woke nonsense.
Yes, we sandwich the bullshit in between the respect. Peterson's approach here seems to have unlocked a new interest in particularly the Bible and, as he calls it, the biblical corpus. My friend Chris Williamson asked him recently on a podcast, because he kept talking about the biblical corpus. He said, when you say the biblical corpus, do you mean the Bible? He says, yes. And I'm thinking, well, why not just call it the Bible then? But he has inspired this renewed interest in the biblical corpus because of that. Because now when you see people debating religion, it tends to be less does God exist and more about the utility of religion and the Jungian archetypes and stuff. The God Delusion, which was the atheist book, do you think it still survives as a sufficient treatment of God and religion in modern culture? If you were to write it again, would you be taking the same approach of talking about it as a scientific issue, or would you feel the need to change the way that you're talking about the subject
I would
altogether?
certainly still talk about it as a scientific issue, because I think that's the most important thing. I probably might add a chapter on the idea of what Dan Dennett calls belief in belief, where the idea that whether you believe it or not, it's a good idea that some people do. And I think that's patronizing. I think that's condescending. It's sort of saying, well, we intellectuals don't need this crutch, but other people may do. And if they do, then it's a good thing because it helps in the battle against Putin.
So right there, as expected, you see Richard Dawkins kind of trying to mock and deride Christianity, as you might expect that he would do. But he brings in Jordan Peterson, and I do have to say, I kind of actually agree with his critique of Jordan Peterson. Let's first look at Jordan and ask why he is so popular. I think I can answer this in a way that perhaps doesn't get mentioned very much, but after 22 years of Christian ministry, I can at least tell you why he's very popular among Christians. And this is because the modern day megachurch has done their dead level best to to rob Christianity of its utility, to rob it of its mission. And certainly one of the missions of the church is not just to cause you to fill up a seat or to cause you to give money to it or to potentially even lift your hands for a song. The purpose of the church is to change you into what a Christian is supposed to be, to change you into a moral human being. But from the modern day megachurch and their pastors who care more about skinny jeans and dressing like Yeezy than they actually do about the truth, you get things like, you don't have to believe to belong. Like, we don't care what you believe. Now, it's an argument for a different day, how connected your belief and your behavior actually is. But ultimately, all I can tell you is that young people especially are leaving the church because what they find in the modern day megachurch very often is a superficial form of religion that has stripped it of all of its power to change you into a different person, its power to possess a morality that flies in the face, that is countercultural to our society today. So many modern day pastors just want you enjoying their sermons and clapping rather than becoming the person that God has called you to be. This is why you hear things like, you can't legislate morality, and we shouldn't talk about abortion in churches, and we can't talk about homosexuality in churches, because that will push people away. And we all know the purpose of the church is not to create in us a moral sentiment, it's to fill butts, or fill seats with butts. Yeah. So suffice to say, that is why Jordan Peterson is so popular, because he refuses that form of religion and is actually showing people that religion can have meaning and purpose in your life that can literally change you. That is how to be relevant in church, not to try to create, basically these concert-style worship services that people could go out and find at a Taylor Swift concert. So that's why Jordan Peterson is popular. But I think Richard Dawkins has a point. It's a good place to start with people to assume that these great myths can create in us a moral sentiment, but it's not enough. We need to go the next step, because maybe they're only worth believing if they are true. So I'll put it to you this way. I've used this strategy before in the past as an apologist. I will tell people, hey, maybe you don't have to believe everything the Bible says today or even tomorrow, but here's what I would encourage you to do. Go to the Bible, start actually reading it, see what it says, and really see if you can derive meaning from it. See if you can take these stories, even if you don't believe they're true, just believe that they're like Snow White stories, whatever, like Jordan Peterson does. They're no less than Disney stories, but see if there's a moral that you can draw from the story that is important for your life. So I think that's a great starting point for somebody that's a skeptic, but you want to move them beyond those baby steps and do them a favor and say, now the second step, the second part of that is to say, if you find that these stories that you perceive as myth actually hold great benefit for your life, for present and future generations, then maybe you might have to go to the second step, that they are actually true. Now, I can argue all day long, and it's a podcast for a different day perhaps, whether or not the resurrection is literally true and whether or not the virgin birth is literally true. I don't know how you get a religion that sweeps the world as it has today and becomes the major religion. I don't know how you get a religion that where the founders of that religion know for a fact that the resurrection is false, but then go out and start preaching that resurrection, risk their life preaching that resurrection, and then it becomes the global phenomenon that it is today, unless Christianity is indeed true. So this is what C.S. Lewis says. He says Christianity is the greatest myth. By that, he doesn't mean it's fake. This is what he means. He's kind of taking Jordan Peterson's side. Yes, it possesses all of the great mythos of society, past, present, and future, to create a great society. It has all these wonderful stories, but it is the greatest myth because they are not just stories, they are actually true. And wouldn't it be more beneficial, more powerful, more compelling if these stories that you perceive as myth actually were true? And since I believe that they are, I think it is incumbent upon us to tell people that they are. So suffice to say, I think Richard Dawkins actually kind of has a valid critique here about Jordan Peterson. It's not enough just to say these are great myths. This is the greatest myth. Now, oddly enough, I'll continue to agree slightly with Richard Dawkins on his next clip about William Lane Craig. Check it out.
Who's the most formidable debate opponent that you have had in your career that you can think of now on this question of God's existence?
I don't think there are any. Not that I'm formidable myself, but I don't think that there are any very good arguments.
No point in a debate where you're sat there getting ready to get up and give your 10-minute rebuttal while they're speaking, writing your notes and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to say to that? That's a fair point.
I don't think so.
Now, I know I'm stopping again really quick, but I do have to tell you, maybe because Richard Dawkins is so old, he has forgotten formidable opponents in the past, but I can go ahead and show you one right here.
I said that it is you who's arguing that God is a delusion.
Oh, sorry. All right, thanks.
And in order to weigh that argument, I need to know what you mean by God. And if you say, if there is a God, you have to ask who created God, that means that you're reduced to thinking about created gods. Well, none of us believe in created gods, Jews, Muslims, or Christians. And I think that argument then is entirely beside the point, and perhaps you ought to put it on your shelf marked celestial teapots where it belongs.
Hopefully that helps you, Richard. But let's continue on and hear what he has to say about William Lane Craig.
I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant. It's not that I've got great points. It's just that I don't think there are any good points to be made.
Yeah, maybe it's something about the debate format as well. Everybody's so prepared that
Yes.
you're rarely caught off guard.
Yes. I mean, the sort of professional debaters on behalf of religion, people like William Craig, I've no time for him. I mean, he's got this sort of loud, rather pompous voice, and he says that's a premise 1, deduction 2, and things like that, and the audience, I suppose, is supposed to be impressed.
I've had William Lane Craig twice on my podcast, and I always had a good experience with him. Having said that, I didn't debate him. I don't know what that would be like. It's something you're not interested in doing, debating William Lane Craig? Or having a conversation perhaps with William Lane Craig?
I have done. I've vowed not to. I feel such contempt for him because of his, I don't know whether you've seen what he says about the Israelites slaughtering the Midianites, and instead of saying what any decent theologian would say, well, it never happened, and this is just an Old Testament story. He says, well, the Midianites had it coming because they were so sinful. And then if you worry about the Midianite children who had their brains beaten out of them, that's okay because they went straight to heaven. And that finished him off as far as I was concerned. Now, for me, I actually wrote a piece in the Guardian saying why I will never have anything to do with him.
I can see why you might sort of look at something like that and say that's an evil thing to think. That's an evil thing to say. I don't want to debate this person. A few moments ago, you told me that the idea of the New Testament in general about being born in sin and needing salvation is an evil idea.
Yes,
and yet. That's an idea that many of the opponents that you have spoken to will have believed. They believe evil things too. So why particularly with William Lane Craig?
It's a fair point. I think the thing is that the Christian theologians who take this seriously are honestly well-meaning. I mean, they believe in the God of love. They believe in Jesus as the Son of God of love, and so on. I think the sheer they would never have defended the slaughter of the Midianites and the Jebusites and things in the book of Joshua as somehow justified because the Midianites were sinful.
All right, so first the disagreement here. The kind of contempt that Dawkins has for William Lane Craig and calls him kind of like a morally reprehensible individual because of what he believes about Numbers 31, I think it is, and the Midianites. He's morally reprehensible, so much to be contemptible and beneath the time of Richard Dawkins. So like milquetoast William Lane Craig is a moral reprobate and Richard Dawkins is the good one here. This is akin to the time that Joe Biden, back when he was not senile, called Romney the guy that wants to put black people back in chains.
They're going to put you all back in chains.
That's right, Mormon Romney wants to put black people back in chains. What a freaking liar. Needless to say, to compare William Lane Craig and Richard Dawkins, at least in terms of morality, isn't even fair. I promise you. If you stack both of these men up on a list, William Lane Craig would be kinder to strangers, more benevolent, more charitable, and basically more ethical in every objective metric that you could possibly think of, more so than Richard Dawkins. So, pushing that aside, I kind of actually agree with Dawkins here about contempt. I don't really believe that you have business debating anybody that you hold to that degree of contempt. If I consented to debate everybody on social media or on YouTube that challenged me to a debate, not only would I have sparingly little time for the important things in life, my family and God, but I would also be boring the heck out of each and every one of you, because I would be producing a piece of content that is absolutely ridiculous and pointless. So I have to say that I don't disagree with Dawkins here. I disagree with the fact that he thinks William Lane Craig is smug and obviously does not possess a mirror, but I don't disagree with the fact that perhaps he shouldn't debate William Lane Craig if he is not going to take his ideas seriously. But it does bring us to the second thing, and that is, does Richard Dawkins have a right not to take Christians seriously? And there we have a little bit of a problem, because I can show you scientific arguments that sure seem to back up the Christian faith, unlike Richard Dawkins is willing to admit. I mean, I could show you in history that there is no such thing really as science without Christians. I'm talking about people like Pascal, Galileo. I'm even talking about people like Einstein, who weren't necessarily Christians, but said things like, hey, you know, the incomprehensible thing about the universe is how comprehensible it is. In other words, he's pointing to the fact that there may kind of be a design. And I'm also pointing to the ideas of things that you can find within intelligent design. I'm talking about the fact that our planet seems specifically designed to sustain life. That if you pushed it to the left, God forbid, maybe pushed it to the right, I'm talking about microscopic measurements, just slightly to the right, then ultimately this planet would no longer have life on it anymore. When you think about what it takes for this planet to be positioned the way that it is to sustain life, it sure seems like there's a designer. I'm talking about arguments like irreducible complexity. The fact that if you take the simplest life form, the simplest single-celled organism that you must have, the basic building block for life, without it, there is no life. If you take that single-celled organism and you put it under a microscope, you see such complexity that you cannot come away from that complexity thinking anything other than, boy, this strangely seems designed. It's the argument from irreducible complexity, that you cannot reduce it any further, but it is still so complex that it seems to be designed. I'm talking about that and much more. I'm even talking about arguments from history, talking about the fact that every major scholar, even if they're skeptics, believe that Jesus existed.
There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who teaches classics, ancient history, New Testament, early Christianity, any related field, who doubts that Jesus existed.
Based upon extra biblical literature, that there's just no way around it. Jesus was a historical figure that demands our attention. Who was he? Was he just a good man and then Christians came along and put some mythos around his life? Or maybe he is who he says he is. I know, crazy. I can tell you this. As far as history is concerned, every major archaeological find in the history of the world has affirmed the scripture. I'm talking about things like the Merneptah stele. This huge rock that had engravings on it was dated at a time that prior to it, most people didn't believe that the Israelites really existed in large fashion and weren't really a, defined people group. And because of that, they dated the Exodus to far later than what the Bible actually dates it as. But the problem is that Merneptah stele actually has a portion that refers to the Israelites, meaning that the Bible was actually right and that the dating of Exodus sure seems on par with this archaeological finding. And I could go on and on and on and show you how archaeology affirms what the scripture says. And all of that should cause us enough pause to step back and come away with the conclusion that it isn't God that's dead, but it's atheism that's dead. Maybe you just want to take the easy way out, and fine. The easiest thing that you can do if you're going to be an intellectually honest person is just to come away as an agnostic rather than to come away as an atheist. You say, well, I can't prove that Christianity is right, but I can't prove that God doesn't exist, so I'm just kind of in the middle. I'm agnostic to the fact. I don't know if there's a God. I'm open to it. That's at least the easiest position that you can take to be an intellectually honest person. But perhaps if you're willing to go the next step, then you would take the courageous and the most intellectually honest step by suggesting that there is at least enough evidence to push you into the camp of faith, and specifically the Christian faith, when you really grapple with all of the evidence for the Christian faith. And if you do that, if you are that honest and that courageous, all I can say to you is welcome to the party. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go with God.